Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today in studio with us for the first hour. Kay Wyma, who's been with us before. Second hour, we're going to have Tim LaHaye, so lots of things to cover. And for those of you that, especially during the summer months, are saying, what do I need to do with my kids? And maybe I could use this as a way to teach them some principles that would be very important. I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation. Kay Wills Wyma has been with us before. We've talked about her book, Cleaning House, a Mom's 12-Month Experiment to Rid Her Home of Youth Entitlement. We also have posted one of her blog posts, which I would certainly recommend that you read on a regular basis. This one called Summer Reading. We'll get into that in just a minute. And she is a mother to 5 children and is the author of that book, another one coming out next year, as I understand, as well, but has had quite an interesting career before being a mom. You've worked with Roger Staubach. I know that you traveled with Dan and Marilyn Quayle. You've worked with Nations Bank. You have your MBA, so you bring so much to the table. But you are an incredibly gifted writer and a great communicator. So thanks for being in studio with us today.
Thanks for having me. And go ahead and set the bar a little lower. Get your expectations in the right spot.
It's all good. It's all good. By the way, I might just mention that she is in studio. And those of you that like to watch the program, our live cast is actually taking place. So that's a place for you to see how we're dressed and how we're having a conversation today, if you'd like to join the conversation. But let's for a minute talk about that book, because it has made such an impact. It's been out about 2 years, published by Waterbrook, and people can still find it in the local bookstore. I think we have it in our Point of View store if you can't find it in your bookstore. But you really came to the conclusion that kids have a sense of entitlement, that they're sitting there. You tell one story of being on Preston Road and your son saying, do I look good in a Porsche, those kinds of things. I said, wait a minute, I need to get involved here. These kids have a sense of entitlement. And frankly, I think your book came out a little bit early, because now, over the last 2 years, there are all sorts of articles, Kay, in USA
great.
Today about these entitled youth, entitled millennials, entitled post-millennials that are finding themselves kind of growing up in this world of affluence and attention. And so as a result, they're getting all sorts of applause without accountability. And that's one of the things you talk about in your book.
Yeah, and I think it hits every socioeconomic sphere, because I think we'd love for it to be an affluent issue, but it actually isn't. And it's one of those things that has gone across the board now. It's not just our homes, but it's our schools, it's our government. It's promoting an idea that you deserve something or that you are owed something. And people are getting out of the mix of actually letting kids fail, letting a teacher use a red marker, heaven forbid, because somebody might get a lawsuit against that. And it's such a disservice against these children, because it's saying to them, you can't do it. The message we do with great intentions of helping them along or making sure they don't fail or making sure things don't hurt. But on the other side of that is someone that actually believes that they can't do it. And therein lies the travesty,
right,
which really is counter to what this country was founded on, because we were founded on ingenuity, and we were founded on people looking at the mountain and going for it instead of expecting it to come to them, or for them not to see it as an opportunity. They see it as an obstacle and something you can't do. And it's off of so much of great intentions and a lot of love that we step in and do so many things for these kids that they actually can and should be doing themselves.
Kay Wyma with us. And, one of the interviews we did a while back is with Tom and Jess Rayner. Tom Rayner with Lifeway did a very extensive survey of millennials in general. So we'll look at the generation that was born between 1980 and 2000 and looking at the leading edge. One of the questions they ask is, do you agree with the statement, I can do great things? 96% said yes. And I said, well, if you've grown up in a world where everybody on the soccer team gets a trophy, why wouldn't you think that you can do things great?
Yeah.
I appreciate the optimism, but there's going to be a crash into the brick wall of reality that's going to really hurt some of these kids, don't you think?
I do, and it's a disservice. We just came off swim. Right now there's a lot of people doing swim team.
Right.
And that's like the quintessential place where everybody gets a ribbon, which is shocking to me. I mean, you have 17, 18-year-old kids there that are getting participation ribbons, and it ruins the ribbon. And for all kids, every trophy that they get that they didn't do anything for, they know that they didn't do anything for it. And there's been new research because of this issue that's happening in society. They're looking at the question, does the self-esteem movement work? And the answer is it actually causes more problems than it does help unless there's actual real action that has occurred to cause the award. Because you're actually hurting them. You're not helping them by giving them trophies and stickers and stamps and all those things. But we think we are.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about your book, and then I want to get into your blog, which I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. But some of our listeners may remember this, but they have to have a good memory because it's been a year since we've had you on. And that is one of the things you set down, Kay, was, okay, there are at least 12 things my kids need to know before they leave the nest. And they need to know how to make their bed. They need to know how to cook. They certainly need to know how to do some yard work. They need to know how to clean a bathroom, which is a good idea. How to get a job. I'm going to say more about that in just a minute. Know how to do the laundry. Know a little bit about handiwork. Host a party. Work together. Run errands. Put others first and act mannerly. I think I got all 12 of them. And so as a result, that really sets you on a course for a fairly long period of time, because you don't accomplish that in 3 days. You don't even accomplish that in 12 days, but you really felt that this was something necessary, not only for you, but I hope for all of our listeners, to begin to inculcate in their kids. And I think it's summer, since it's summertime, this is a good time to actually practice some of that, don't you think?
It's a great time. And just so you know, I was just mad at my kids. I was so frustrated after that Porsche comment, like a 14-year-old actually thinking he might drive that at 16. I was so disgusted by that. And then went home and saw every dish out, every bed unmade, everything was a disarray. And I would never consider myself a helicopter parent. No one that I know would consider me that. And it floored me that in our home we were doing this stuff. I'm telling them out of one side of my mouth, you can do anything you put your mind to. And then out of the other side, I'm like doing everything for them. And I was grossed out and mad. And so when you make mom mad, everything changes. And so those were things that were in our house that as I sat on that fateful day going around looking at the kitchen going, they don't know how to do any of that. That's how it all sort of changed, because I really did sit there thinking they don't know Lysol. Lysol is not their friend. Yeah. It's going to be their friend. And so is the washing machine. And there it went. And it was in the midst of that the enormity of what our nation and society as a whole is facing, because it's not just America. You get most of the stuff in Great Britain coming down on this topic as far as hitting the news. And it's causing issues in our country and with this society that look like depression. The rate of depression is higher than it ever has been. Yes. And the latest study put it on overparenting.
Yeah. Well, again, you mentioned the helicopter parents. Another one that they use sometimes in the North is snowplow parents. They plow the ground. And when we talk about getting a job, this one I saw in USA Today. And again, all the way through here, we're going to do stories that people are going to say, you've got to be making this up. But I'm not making this up. The HR department was talking about the fact that from time to time, when the millennial comes in for a job interview, they bring both of their parents to a job interview. Both of their parents coming to a job interview. Something is seriously wrong, and I think it's time for parents to be parents. I know that's a radical idea, but we're going to talk about that today. Kay Wills Wyma with us today, and we certainly want to give you an opportunity as we open up the phones a little bit later to join our conversation. Her book, Cleaning House, a Mom's 12-Month Experiment to Rid Her Home of Youth Entitlement, but we also have her Moat blog. We're going to talk more about what that means in just a minute and talk about some of those summer reading schedules that our kids are supposed to be accomplishing right now. And if you find yourself agreeing with some of the comments, we'll open up the phone soon to give you a chance to make your comments. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the immigration surge at our southern border has not only created a humanitarian crisis, but also has the potential to collapse our immigration system. There simply are not enough ICE agents and other government officials to effectively deal with this illegal immigration invasion. Now, some members of Congress believe that this was intentional, that it was part of a Cloward-Piven strategy to overwhelm America. Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven were professors at Columbia University, where the president attended as an undergraduate student. They proposed a strategy intended to overload America's welfare system in order to precipitate a crisis. Doing so, they believed, would force politicians to replace the current welfare system with a national system of a guaranteed annual income. Representative Steve King said that he feels the current crisis is an attempt to flood the border with illegals and is playing out the Cloward-Piven theory. Representative Steve Stockman also believes the administration is trying to do a Cloward-Piven thing with the border. Was this immigration surge intentional or accidental? Well, there's good evidence, at least, that the government was preparing for this. Back in January, the Department of Homeland Security put out a purchase order for escort services for 65,000 unaccompanied illegal alien children. Whether this immigration surge was intentional or accidental is a topic of others to discuss. The reality is that we have tens of thousands of unaccompanied children crossing into America. They're not being sent back. A leaked Homeland Security memo admitted that only 0.1% of the Central American minors illegally entering the United States were deported in the last fiscal year. There is no reason to believe that many more will be sent back to their home countries. I expect some liberal judges to rule against deportation, and we know that continuous media stories will drive public opinion against deportation. Whether intentional or accidental, the Cloward-Piven strategy is unfolding before our eyes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Kay Wills Wyma in studio with me today, and if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll open up the phones in just a few minutes. But we talked about your book, A Cleaning House, a mom's 12-month experiment to rid her home of youth entitlement. Let me also point people to, and we have a link to it, to the Moat blog. Mother of an adolescence and teen should never walk or drive the road alone. I love that. And we posted one there on summer reading. So we'll talk about both of those. But for just a minute, back to your book. You, out of a sense of frustration, anger, and determination, decided, okay, these are at least 12 things my kids are going to learn before they fly the coop. And you have one that will be going off to college in a year. So that's
17-year-old.
Yeah, here you go. So I'd love to see, how did you go about that? Because there are some moms right now, they got pen in hand, they're going to write this down. What do I do to make sure that by the time my young child, boy or girl, graduates from high school, are at least able to master these dozen things? How did you go about it?
Well, we just did it. And herein lies, because I will tell you that whoever is going to be roommates for this kid, I'm sure they're going to come and go, he doesn't do anything. Because, you know, they're people. And I had to, at one point, get out of the process and actually take it about the intent behind the process, because it could make me crazy. Yes. And the reason why I started it is because I want my kids to be independent. I really want them to be the tools for whatever they were created to be, because they are gifted. Each one of these children, they're gifted, and they were put into the homes by the Lord for the specific home that they are supposed to be in. Okay, so it's like, how do you love this kid? Well, one way to love the kid is let them be independent, you know, not always looking to somebody else to serve them. So that's one way to do it. And they all know how to do all of these tasks. And so they are proficient at each one of these. However, today, one of them will say to me, I don't know how to do the dishes. I can't. How do you turn on the washing machine? And we will look at each other and admit that they know exactly how to do all this stuff, but there's still pushback because they're regular kids.
Yes.
And so at one point I had to, in my mind, say, these will be functioning adults. In their backpack are all the tools for them to be able to live life and live it successfully. If the answer is yes, happy day. Then we can go on loving them. And part of it is giving them over to themselves at different points. But this college stuff, it's like the epitome of all of this.
Yes.
Even filling out the SAT form, which one of mine pushed back on that and actually told me to do it for him, which I sat in the car going, who are you saying this to? You know full well I'm not filling out that form for you. And as I did, a mother said to me, you need to look at it. And I did, Kerby. I went to look at it, and it floored me because everything in this kid's life was put down to a box to be checked.
Right.
And it took all that he had worked for, and it became a teeny little box, far outnumbered by the boxes he didn't check. And so this person that might have insecurity issues came on the other side of that, having it been solidified for him that he can't do anything. Well, that I don't have any interest in that, because I don't want some SAT form telling my kid who he is. And therein lies the parent to walk alongside and say, that's not who you are. This is who you are. Don't let it be about the process. This is about you and your giftedness. And there is a place for you. And so that it's peppered in all this stuff. We want there to be an answer, but the answer really is loving your child and helping them realize that there is something they have to offer this world. And it's a challenge, but it's a great challenge because you love them like nobody else can.
You're talking about government forms. I'm older than you, and my kids have already been through college, and I was there when they first implemented the FAFSA form, which is the form you fill out of your financial aid. And I was there when they were just starting it online, and before we had all people going online. And the first year, when I actually started to fill it out for my kids, because a lot of the information you only know,
right.
It was all, when it would say I, it meant the student. And so the form was written originally as if the student was filling it out. And a couple of times I realized my income, and I go, wait a minute, no, he means my daughter's income. Oh, your parents' income. And by the next year, they'd already figured it out. And it was
they'd
your
taken all the
income.
I and me out of it.
Yeah, because they recognized the parents are going to fill it out. And that, I think, is illustrative, again, of even the government sort of just saying, okay, let's just face it, the kids are not going to do all of this. And I want to say that there were a few of us that when we went off to college, we went off by ourselves.
Yep.
I have staff members at Probe that actually literally got on a train and went to college by themselves. I got on an airplane and went to college by myself. You can't even imagine that now in the world of helicopter parents, can you?
Well, and that's like one of the issues that you brought up with the employer. See also the college campuses that now actually have representatives on the university campus for the parents, and to get the parents off of the campus so that they can deal with the kids. And it's one of those things where it's not very hard for us to say, your parents buy your books for you. I'm not even sure my parents knew what classes I took, and they for sure never knew who I interviewed with, because that was what people did. Mm-hmm. And there are very good things about that. There's independence in there. There's the person. And here we sit at college applications, and I hold my breath, because guess who's filling out their college application? My kid. Yeah. And I know that he's competing against somebody that probably has a tutor, probably has somebody doing their essays for them, probably has, you could go down the list, and it takes your breath away in so many of these aspects, because it could be your first grader that you send with them having put their backpack together and not you. Because at some point they need to be able to do it themselves, and it makes them feel good.
Yes.
They feel physically better on the other side of that, even if the road is paved with wines.
And we're not talking about WINES.
No, but someone might need some on the other side.
Sure. Let's take a break in just a minute. But just before we do, I want to get to your blog, because it's called the Moat blog. And the one that you've posted here is summer reading. And I really wanted to focus on that, because we all, if we've been parents, recognize that usually during the summer there are some reading responsibilities. As a matter of fact, even when I went to graduate school, they gave me a reading list before I went to Georgetown, a reading list before I went to Yale. I understand that. But these reading lists can be a little bit burdensome. And your argument is after a while, it's back to that checking the box. Yep. Are they enjoying the great literature of the world, or are they just checking a box? And you went into the whole crisis of education today. We teach to the test, we check out boxes. really, what about education for education's sake? Your thoughts?
For the love of learning. When I saw their summer reading list, I had a moment because there were some phenomenal books on this. And I thought, they're not going to get everything they can out of this book because they're going to read it to do the summer reading instead of read it to enjoy it. And that, that's got legs on it because you can go down that road a lot. Because if you're just teaching the child to be taught to be in a top tier school, every school wants to be on the top tier. Everyone wants to be a blue ribbon. And then you go back to the boxes they check in order to achieve that. Where is the love of learning? And you can take that back to these chores in your home. If you are doing the chores in your home so that you can check off a box so that your kid's proficient at this, then the point behind that has been missed. Because involved in every aspect of chores in your home is an element of serving somebody besides yourself. And there's the secret of life. It really is. It's other-centered. And in the summer reading, they pick these phenomenal pieces of literature where you wrestle with things, with moral dilemma, with society at large, all these where you can actually get inside and think if they'll go that far. And so it's just one of those points that made me think about a lot of other things, a lot of other areas in our life where we might be checking the box instead of getting everything you can out of it.
Well, again, the first article we've posted here today is the one that you just wrote recently on summer reading. It's part of the Moat blog, and I would encourage those of you that read blogs, or even if you've never read a blog, this is one you want to read because I love what Kay writes on a regular basis, and that is an opportunity for you to read her. Of course, we've mentioned her book, Cleaning House, but just before we go to a break, today John Stone Street did something that just made me laugh because the journal Nature found that given the choice, many people would rather give themselves mild electric shocks than sit idly in a room for 15 minutes. That was published in the journal Nature. Now, here's what it was. Research done by Timothy Wilson, University of Virginia. He had undergraduates, and they were asked to sit alone without mobile devices, books, or any other kind of entertainment for 15 minutes. That's it, 15 minutes, he says. Nearly half found this to be an unpleasant experience. Allowed to repeat the experiment in the comfort of their own homes, nearly a third of the study subjects later admitted to cheating. They could not spend 15 minutes in quiet. Now, he says, comes the bizarre part. In the next experiment, participants were given a small electric shock akin to a jolt of static electricity. It was so unpleasant that 3/4 of them said they'd be willing to pay not to experience the shock again. But when participants sat in the room alone with their thoughts, 2/3, or 67% of male participants, and 1/4, that is 25% of female subjects, were so eager to find something to do, they shocked themselves voluntarily. I am not making this up. And when we come back from the break, I want to talk about how difficult it is in a world where your young children, or maybe your grandchildren, are surrounded by these mobile devices. Whatever happened, Kay, to be quiet, be still, and know that I'm God, Psalm 46. So we're going to come back and talk about that. The phones are already ringing, so I might as well open up the phones. Kay is always doing that. So 1-800-351-1212. If this connects with you, maybe you would like to lament what is happening in your family, or maybe you have some positive things that have happened in your family you'd like to share with us. You certainly can find a lot of those positive ideas in Cleaning House, a mom's 12-month experiment to rid her home of youth entitlement. It's published by Roderbrook, and we have information about it on our website here, and we also, of course, have the link to the Moat blog as well as one of the articles. So some great ways that you can connect up with Kay Wills Wyma. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. We're pleased to have in studio a little bit longer Kay Wyma, and if you would like to join us, we would love to get your phone calls. Let's head out, first of all, to Georgia, WAGP. Grace, I think you'd like to share some things with us, and we'd love to hear from you.
I wish my parents had not let me leave home before teaching me to keep a calendar so that I would not make appointments and not show up or arrive late, and a budget. Two of those things I would like to add to the list of 12.
Well, we're up to 14, I guess. But again, certainly just some of the basics that would be important. Maybe how to balance a checkbook you could put into that one. I mean,
they did. Money was a big part of what we did. And I got flack a tiny bit on that. How can you pay your kids for doing things that they should be doing around their house? But they learned so much about money management and Grace, about time management, because when they had to get a job, they had to show up on time. And last summer, one of my kids worked. She was 11 when she did this. And so they can do things a lot younger than you think they can.
Yes.
And the hard part is finding places that will employ these kids. But I tell you what, that child kept her own calendar, kept her schedule, knew what days she needed to wear something nice to work because the head honcho would be there. And she was up. I never woke her up. And it was fascinating to me to watch her and to watch her independence grow through allowing her to do those things.
Grace, I get the sense that you had to learn those lessons later on in life, and you probably paid a penalty because you didn't learn them before you went off and left home.
A lot of confusion and a lot of chaos, and I am still learning.
Me too, Grace.
Well, we still are. When you said find a job, that was certainly the case with my son. And finally, we found a place for him to work, and that was the pizza place. And I came to the owner and I said, look, if you can just send him home fed, we'll call it even. You don't even need to pay him.
Isn't that the truth?
I mean, as well. You've got some kids. You got 5 kids. And I mean, especially when they were going through sports. At that time, he was playing football. He was doing tennis and some other things. But basketball kind of ended up being his sport. But one time we had the entire youth group over from church. And so most of these kids are football players, a few basketball players, some in tennis, 1 or 2 in the golf team, but they were all athletes. And I brought in a stack of pizza boxes this high. I mean, you can see how high I'm talking about them. And in 5 minutes, those were gone.
Yeah.
I mean, they were, I was afraid they're going to eat the draperies, I mean, and parents, if you have a preteen, and especially it's a boy in athletics, I'm just warning you now. I mean, it's just amazing what you end up spending in food alone.
A lot. It's true.
It's just amazing.
But I have done the same thing going into, even at our grocery store. I'm like,
sure.
They will come for free. Just please let them bag your groceries. And the hard part now is the insurance laws. Like, it's very hard to get your kid a job and that is younger than 14. And even then, the age is 17 where they're hiring people.
Yeah.
So.
And it is harder because the minimum wage has gone up so much.
Yes.
I mean, I think of my first couple of jobs in a machine shop, and certainly I worked laying pipe and ditch digging and janitorial and things like that. Now, because the minimum wage is so high, though some of those jobs that I was able to do when I was younger just simply don't exist.
Yeah, and you just made me think of Ashton Kutcher, because he did last year at the Nickelodeon Teen Awards.
Great?
It was terrific because he had these kids, we love you, and thinking he went to them and said, you look at me and you think this is what you want, but you don't know what it took to get here. And it involved, he said, like working in a warehouse, sweeping Cheerio dust off the floor, and being a painter, doing these jobs that were very hard and what somebody might consider menial, but to him that's what paved his road to success, because he knew what hard work was. He knew what it was like to work a place where he may not want to work for his whole life, and it gave him the impetus to go forth and do those things that he wanted to do. People look at him and they think, it just happened. Like J.K. Rowling, I just want to be J.K. Rowling. They don't realize how many times she failed before, because I think it was 150 times she went to a publisher and was turned down. Nobody talks about that part and what it took, the gumption it took to keep going.
By the way, I am going to talk about that this Saturday, because we have the Christian Writers Conference here in Dallas, and I have a list of all the people that were rejected and how many times they were rejected, and it is an amazing story. But back to the Ashton Kutcher one, we need to maybe post that video.
It's so good.
Because one of the lines I remember is, I never thought that any job was beneath me.
That's exactly right.
What a great line, because, I've put shingles on houses in Texas heat. I have been in muddy holes, and I've been around, of course, all sorts of things in the machine shop. I won't even go into how gross some of that can get, and all the picking up of filings and things like that. As soon as you start having that idea of entitlement, you start saying, well, there's certain jobs that are beneath me.
There is, but we got to hit the parents here a little bit too, because this goes on this free play idea. Because
go for it,
I'm not kidding, because this goes in, a parent might hear that and they're like, oh, the safety, you can't put them in a machine shop because they might get hurt. And we have erred so far on the side of protecting these kids that we don't even give them a chance to do something that, quote, might be dangerous. In the UK, they're having trouble. There was this trend to put knee pads on your babies while they're learning how to walk so their knees don't get skinned. And of course, it hurt the ligaments and the tendons and caused the growth to not occur. And they're saying the same thing is happening with this trend toward not letting your child do something, quote, dangerous. And it's there was a study that was done at the University of Colorado, and the authors studied the schedules and the play habits of 76-year-old children, measuring how much time each of them spent in less structured, spontaneous activities such as imaginative play, self-selective reading, and structured activities organized and supervised by adults. And on the whole, the more time kids spent in structured activities, the worse their sense of self-directed control was. And it's worth noting that when classifying activities as less structured or structured, the authors deemed all of the child-initiated activities as less structured, while all the adult-led activities were structured. And so again, it goes into this well-meaning. We do it because we want to keep them safe, or we don't want them to hurt, or all these kinds of things. But in doing that, you're actually debilitating them. Yeah. And you're making it to where they don't participate. There was another study that was done that showed that these kids, they need to do things that scare them. Like somebody climbing on something that might seem high, it gives them this euphoric feeling like they're testing a boundary when it's actually safe, but it might have this feeling like they're doing something that they didn't think they could do, which always came back to me as we went through this process. It was this idea, I didn't think I could do it, I didn't know I could do it, and as soon as they accomplish something they don't think they can do, they actually look for the next thing.
Well, again, those of us that send our kids to Christian camps, as you do and I do, and I've spoken at Christian camps, what are the thing the kids love the most? Ropes course, because they're safe, but they have a sense of accomplishment that they've never had because everything's been safe, because they got the bumper pads and they had helmets and all that, which is really good. But at the same time, it's been called the safest generation in American history, but also the least challenged generation.
Yes, and they're having, there's trends now to have free play parks where the parents are not allowed in them. Mm-hmm. And they have things around them like ropes on a tree so your kid could climb up the rope and get in the tree. They even have, and there are supervisors on the park, but they have matches out for someone to actually light a match because they've never lit a match before. Yeah. And things like this that you can... I know you left your house pretty much, on a Saturday and never came back. We did too, and we built forts, and we lived adventurously as much as you could inside a city. And there was something about that gives this independence that is so important. That goes back to again why this country was founded. It was on ingenuity. It was on thinkers, people that could actually think, and it's all tied together.
Entrepreneurs, thinkers, and people willing to challenge themselves. So some great things that we're learning. And again, as I've said before, we spend millions of dollars every year doing studies to basically conclude what moms already know in the first place. And that's one of those studies that found that out. Let's go to South Carolina for just a minute. WKCM. And George, I think you'd like to share some things.
Oh, yes, sir. Like I say, I work at a college campus, and I see kids that get there and they don't even know how to wash their clothes, bleaching their clothes, and or the one who wear every piece of garment twice, and they will charge their average either learn to wash it or buy a new one. But I totally agree with her. You need to train your child before they leave home.
Well, you've given a great illustration. There you are in college seeing kids that don't know how to wash their clothes, which probably also says they don't know how to make a bed. They probably don't know how to organize their lives, probably don't know how to balance a checkbook, probably don't even know how to handle all of that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Go for it.
Definitely. But number one thing I need Christian parents to train their child is that before they leave home, is that they know the Lord, they love the Lord, and they love the word of the Lord that's down in them. Because when they get to campus, and as the words say, well, you've sown something into the person's heart, and the devil come quickly and snatch that away. When they get to campus, the devil snatch everything out of them. I see too much kids that say, well, my dad is a pastor, or my mother is a pastor. And you see the life that they're living, it make you think,
sure,
what's going on at home?
I would say so. That kind of reminds me of the movie God Is Not Dead, because, some of the young people end up in a university setting in a classroom where the professor's a little bit like the individual played by Kevin Sorbo, who is an atheist, and sometimes Philosophy 101 might as well be indoctrination into Atheism 101. Mm-hmm. But I want to come back and talk about that. I have one of those breaks coming up, but he was talking about not even knowing how to wash their clothes. I think that tells us why we need to do a better job of parenting before we send them off into the world. We'll continue our conversation with Kay Wyma right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Kay Wyma with us for a few more minutes, and George raised some very good questions. At first, of course, he was talking about doing the wash, but then he came into the faith equation, and I'd love to have you, Kay, talk about that for just a minute, because it is really important that for our young people, when they go off to college, that they really have adopted the faith of their parents for themselves. And lots of times they're just being fed by their parents, by the pastor, by the teachers, maybe even by YouTube and other kinds of Bible studies. But if that is not part of who they are, as you heard George mention a minute ago, you have people coming from, young people coming from Christian schools, coming from churches where their father is the pastor, who still nevertheless give up on their faith.
It's really fascinating to consider, because we've been feeding these kids, doing everything for them, doing their chores for them, making life so easy. And I would, you don't have to go too far to look at the trend for this entertainment style of teaching kids about their faith, because they go into youth group and it's loud and it's crazy and it's all entertainment. We got to grab them. And how much are we on social media and all these kinds of things that, again, it's this entertainment part and kind of doing it for them. And so when they get there, it just makes sense. I mean, they've got this very shallow consideration of something that's so critically important. And it doesn't take long for them to realize that it's not theirs. In the same way on this work stuff, if everything's done for them, which is, the rate of depression in college is so high, they've had to increase the counseling staffs because these kids get there and they don't know who they are, because they're no longer the best and they're no longer these things that they thought they were, because it was all part of the product that was being produced. And so there's no deep roots. And I'm convinced it's the same thing with the faith. It's scary to let your kid ask questions. It's scary to put it out there. It's scary to let them own it. And it's scary to let them do this stuff on their own, because they might fail, or they might not look right. That's another big thing, because we're on social media just as much as everybody else. Are we letting our kids be a reflection of ourselves, and that's why we need for them to look a certain way? And they're hard questions to dig through, but keep in mind one thing: these are people. They're people that were created for a purpose to do something good. Inside each and every one of them, even if it's a snarky teen that's like won't even acknowledge your existence, inside that crusty person is something that's really worth the time. And it's like, it goes to that idea of taking the time to let them find these things in your home where it actually is safe. They can ask the questions, they can fail, they can mess up, and it's worth it on the other side. I'm convinced it really is. Now we're in the middle, so talk to me in 5 years.
Well, one of the things I've noticed, and I've been on the other side of that, is that we, for many years at Probe, have spent time really preparing young people for college. We've had a college prep program. Now we have a mind games program. And we've brought Ray and Sue Bolin in here. And I know that one of the things Dr. Ray Bolin will oftentimes do when we get the students together is he will pretend to be a professor. And an atheistic professor, I might add. And what you'll get very quickly, Kay, is young people that either have been in a Christian school or even if they've had good education in the churches will, as he begins to ask questions, give the line, the platitude, the one-liners. And then you'll ask them another tough question, and that's all they got. I mean, they know sort of the what, but they don't know the why. And even sometimes, even if they know the why and they've really gone to a worldview-oriented Christian school, they haven't really adopted it. And it's amazing how quickly you can shatter or at least begin to rattle the faith of the young people. Now, our goal there is not to rattle their faith, but to help them see that the rest of what they're going to learn here is just not more data, but it's going to be important for them to really hold to the Christian faith and to really be able to stand the test. But we, as you said, are in this entertainment mindset right now where we're all about educating kids by entertainment. But sometimes we also need to recognize that this youth group or what you do around the dinner table is like a boot camp to prepare them for what they're going to encounter out there in the world.
A boot camp, a load of other-centeredness.
Yeah.
I've watched one of my daughters. I've got a couple of deep ones that are great to talk to me, which is why I love, I bemoan driving carpool because I'm in the car so much, but I also love it because it's that time that they're stuck because they're in a seatbelt and they can't go anywhere. And I think when they're not looking at you, they actually will speak a little bit more. And she has struggled, and I've walked with her this year, one of mine who's just keeps asking me, I just want to know the Lord. I just want to know the Lord. And I keep saying, go to his word and tell him, ask. And And on the other side of this, I'm always telling her, find that person next to you, find something that's good about them, say something nice to them, love them in the moment. If you've got these things that people struggle with, the popularity, the drinking, all these things that everyone's looking for, they're looking to that stuff for a reason, because they are hurting and they need to belong, and they need all this stuff, and yet you've got them all around each other where they can look and encourage and do this. And as they walk through the trenches of that, they actually get to feel, literally physical feel, the good part that comes with it. And therein lies the essence of the faith, where that feels better than the likes on Facebook. It feels better than having someone share your stuff. It feels better. And it feels better because they were created to do it. We were created in the garden for work, to do things. That's what we were there before before it became toil. It was work, because there's people receiving it on every side. And that, to me, as a mom, I can breathe in that, because if they're getting the real stuff, then it's going to be okay on the other side.
One of the things you talk about in your book is number 11, put others first, number 12, actually act mannerly. Those are some very important principles that you were just talking about there. And just before we run out of time, let me mention again the book, Cleaning House, a Mom's 12-Month Experiment to Rid Her Home of Youth Entitlement. But also talk for just a minute about the Moat blog, because I want to encourage as many of our listeners to get some of this great material that you've been talking about today in blog format. So talk about what's available there.
It's a fun place where we really do walk the road together, and it's full of typos and errors, I'm sure, but it's just real. And it's we weren't put on this earth by ourselves; we were put with other people, and it's a safe place to walk it together. And I love the ideas. I love people asking questions. We try to put stuff out there that we're all struggling with. And I love having people that are not in the mud and mire, that are on the other side, that actually come in and opine. And so I have guest bloggers all the time that will answer these tough questions that we're all dealing with.
Well, again, it's called Moat Blog because it stands for Mother of Adolescents and Teens. And that is because a mother of adolescents and teens should never walk or drive the road alone. Now, let me just point out that you are talking about the ones that hold the keys to the kingdom. The next leaders are the kids in your home right now. Yeah. They're the ones that are going to go off to college. They're the ones that are going to take leadership. And one of the things that we have really been focusing on are the millennial generation, which are some of those in there, and then even those coming behind that, because we recognize that there has been a decline in faith and a decline in some of these very important principles that you've talked about. So we can't complain about the culture if we haven't worked in our own homes to produce kids that will make a positive impact on the culture.
Yeah,
right?
And Chuck Colson always said that culture doesn't change people. People change culture. And they're the people that are in your home, and it's good. If you don't want a narcissist epidemic, then go to the ones. The opposite of narcissism is other-centered. There's that Kid President. Have you seen Kid President?
No,
it's
not
hilarious.
Yet, yeah.
You got to see him out. And he put something the other day. There need to be a whole lot less selfies and a whole lot more other people-ies. I thought it was so cute.
So good. Okay, it's always been great to have you in studio. We'd love to do that again, but especially during this summer. I love your piece here on summer reading. Let's encourage our kids during the summer to read, get off of some of those digital devices, but at the same time, let's not always see that as a checkbox. Let's see that value of learning and the value of education. So it's just great to have you in studio. Let's do it again.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
We have quite a bit of information on our website here today, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, we'll have Tim LaHaye with us by phone in just a few minutes, so you'll get a chance to hear from him about his new book on the Book of Revelation Made Clear. We have Kay Wyma has been with us, the first article, Summer Reading, and I would encourage you to read that. If you go down to the web links, you'll see the Moat blog that is there, and that will give you some information about her. We also, of course, have links to Tim LaHaye Ministries and much more, which we'll be talking about in just a minute. As you go there, you will see that we've also posted some videos that you might want to watch. If you are not connected up with this ministry, there is a button that says Get Involved, and that's a way in which you can just put your email in, and then there are some check boxes there. You can get my daily commentary if you'd like. You can receive our show threads, which allows you to know who we're going to have on the program and all the web links that go to your inbox, and so that's all available if you click that box that says Get Involved. And finally, there is a box that says Donate. During these summer months, it's always good to hear and really encourage you to help us out. We do have a need for your financial support, so if you appreciate the conversation we've had today, you might click on that box for Donate and help us out. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk with Dr. Tim LaHaye. Coming up right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time, as I've been saying, with our good friend, Dr. Tim LaHaye. What a friend he has been to the ministry over these years. Author, minister, and speaker. Written more than 60 different nonfiction books, including the one we're going to be talking about today, The Book of Revelation Made Clear, a down-to-earth guide to understanding the most mysterious book of the Bible. Of course, he has written on a wide variety of topics, including family life, human temperament, sexual adjustment, the will of God, Jesus Christ, secular humanism, to mention just a few. Might also mention that as we talk about the book of Revelation, that this fall, in October, the Left Behind movie will be coming out, starring Nicolas Cage. And of course, he has been the president of the Tim LaHaye Ministries, as well as founder of the Pre-Trib Research Center, was a pastor for very many years, holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Western Theological Seminary, a Doctor of Literature degree from Liberty University. And of course, his wife, Beverly LaHaye, founded the Concern Women for America organization. She is the founder and chairman of the board. They have 4 children, 9 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren. Tim LaHaye, Dr. Tim LaHaye, it is always a delight to have you on Point of View with us.
Well, thank you, Kerby. It's good to hear your voice.
Well, it's been great to have you with all of us all these years. You and Marlon were on so many different programs together. Lots of times we used to do a Friday weekend edition together. The three of us would sit around a round table, and you kind of helped us start that. And to this very day, we still do a weekend edition on Fridays, so a lot of that goes back to your influence. And I am excited to talk about this book of Revelation Made Clear, and also might mention that you have a co-author, Timothy Parker, and I've been reading a little bit more about him because he is the senior crossword puzzle editor of USA Today. He's considered the world's most syndicated puzzle compiler, according to Guinness World Records. And so you put this expert on puzzles with a man that is considered the foremost authority on the book of Revelation. This is a pretty good book, and I'm glad the two of you teamed up.
Boy, you said it better than I could. But, Timothy really impressed me because of his spiritual verve and also his incredible craft in writing puzzles. One of the big problems we have today, and as a former pastor for 37 years, I have a burden for young people. And the church is losing a major portion of their young people, particularly those who send their kids to public school.
Yes.
And there seems to be an attack by the secularists against Christianity. And unfortunately, the book of Revelation is almost a closed book to the younger generation. And Timothy comes along, and he has an appeal for young people and an incisive type mind that helps him to understand difficult places. And as I've gone through this book several times, I'm just delighted to have this book put in this particular genre, because young people will read it, and what's more important, they'll not only read it, but they'll understand it, and then they'll remember a lot of it.
Well, and let's, if I can for just a minute, talk about the structure of the book, and then I want to talk about Revelation in general, because this is not your typical book, and I've been telling some people that as I got into it, it wasn't what I necessarily expected. I thought it would be a narrative, and it's actually 77 what are called master quizzes. For example, you can go to Revelation 7, where it talks about the 144,000. And first of all, you have a pre-quiz where you usually ask 3 questions. Then you have a section, what the scriptures say about Revelation 7, then what Revelation 7 means, and at the very end, then you have quiz answers. And so, in a sense, it's more like a series of quizzes where as you take the quizzes as you go along, you learn about the book of Revelation. And frankly, I think, Tim, this might actually work better for the younger generation because everybody sort of likes to take a quiz and see how they're doing. Now, they don't like to take a quiz in a school, but how many times have you seen those things that have shown up on YouTube or on a Facebook page where they say, okay, see if you can answer these questions and I'll give you the answer. Everybody kind of likes to see how they can do. And so in some respects, it's in a format that might be much more intriguing and educational for the young generation. So I want to certainly give you credit, but also Timothy Parker for coming up with this kind of format.
Oh, yeah. It's in the fact that he's done it in the secular world, he's learned the craft in a hard environment, and now he's bringing it over into the biblical environment because he's learned that it's a very helpful way for people to understand difficult things. And the Bible, the book of Revelation is not an easy thing. However, it's one of 2 books in the whole Bible, out of 66 of the Library of God. Only 2 books refer to promised blessing to those that read it. And Revelation is one of them in the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter. And what he's done is he's whet the appetite for young people and people of all ages to read this study and follow the crossword instructions. I'll tell you a funny thing. My wife, almost every year or every day of the 67 years that we've been happily married, does a crossword puzzle. It's almost like reflex action. She gets up real early in the morning, and when I get up, she's at the table working over a crossword puzzle. In my lifetime, and we've been married 67 years, I have never once done a puzzle. It just doesn't appeal. That's just not the way my mind thinks. But I see that she had long observed that she has a unique ability to remember things that I have told her or that she's heard in church and even some of my own sermons, and she can remember them better than I can.
It is amazing. Well, and again, I think this would really appeal to young people, and this is something I might commend to you. First of all, it is published by Thomas Nelson. We have information about it on the website and a summary of it. We also have the trailer, which lasts a little over a minute, so I encourage you to watch the video trailer, then hit that share button so you can put it on your Facebook page or your blog or to send it to someone else. And we also have a link, as I mentioned before, to Tim LaHaye Ministries. But if you want to get a copy of the book, look for it in your local bookstore because it's published by Thomas Nelson. I'm sure it will be there. But if you are not near a bookstore or would like to get it real quickly, we have it in our Point of View store today because we think so highly of it. But I might just say, especially during the summer, this would be maybe where you could challenge your kids to say, okay, I want you to maybe take the first 10 quizzes and see how you do. And that will probably get them so intrigued that they'll spend the rest of the summer going through the 77 different quizzes. And by the time they're done, they're going to know as much as they have gone to seminary. So the book is entitled The Book of Revelation Made Clear. And it is a down-to-earth guide to understanding the most mysterious book of the Bible. Dr. Tim LaHaye with us for just a little bit longer, and as I mentioned a minute ago, we'll come back and talk about this. The Left Behind movie, kind of a reboot coming out in the fall. Nicolas Cage is starring in it. We'll talk about that. And Tim LaHaye has written this with Timothy Parker, who is the puzzle master and is the crossword puzzle editor of USA Today Crosswords, and according to the Guinness World Records, is the world's most syndicated puzzle compiler. So he understands how that works in the minds of individuals, and I think you're going to really enjoy the book. About 200 pages, published by Thomas Nelson. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Tim LaHaye right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the immigration surge at our southern border has not only created a humanitarian crisis, but also has the potential to collapse our immigration system. There simply are not enough ICE agents and other government officials to effectively deal with this illegal immigration invasion. Now, some members of Congress believe that this was intentional, that it was part of a Cloward-Piven strategy to overwhelm America. Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven were professors at Columbia University, where the president attended as an undergraduate student. They proposed a strategy intended to overload America's welfare system in order to precipitate a crisis. Doing so, they believed, would force politicians to replace the current welfare system with a national system of a guaranteed annual income. Representative Steve King said that he feels the current crisis is an attempt to flood the border with illegals and is playing out the Cloward-Piven theory. Representative Steve Stockman also believes the administration is trying to do a Cloward-Piven thing with the border. Was this immigration surge intentional or accidental? Well, there's good evidence, at least, that the government was preparing for this. Back in January, the Department of Homeland Security put out a purchase order for escort services for 65,000 unaccompanied illegal alien children. Whether this immigration surge was intentional or accidental is a topic of others to discuss. The reality is that we have tens of thousands of unaccompanied children crossing into America. They're not being sent back. A leaked Homeland Security memo admitted that only 0.1% of the Central American minors illegally entering the United States were deported in the last fiscal year. There is no reason to believe that many more will be sent back to their home countries. I expect some liberal judges to rule against deportation, and we know that continuous media stories will drive public opinion against deportation. Whether intentional or accidental, the Cloward-Piven strategy is unfolding before our eyes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Tim LaHaye with us for a few more minutes as we talk about the Book of Revelation Made Clear, a down-to-earth guide to understanding the most mysterious book of the Bible. Tim, for just a minute, let's, if we can, at least give people a structure for the Book of Revelation, and that is you have the opening chapter, then you have chapters 2 and 3 about the churches, and then from Revelation 4 on, first of all, it looks very Jewish. You don't hear anything about churches or Christians or anything of that nature, which I think is a very good argument for the rapture. But then, in a sense, each part of that unfolds. And it seems to me that if people apply some of the same biblical interpretation to the book of Revelation that they would to the Gospels or the epistles, and recognize that occasionally there may be some symbolism, but in most cases it's giving you sort of a chronological look at these various judgments, I think most people could, if they started with that assumption, come to some clear conclusions about Revelation. But the problem, as you well know, is some people have said, well, it's all analogy or it's all metaphor. But if you take a basic literal interpretation, a reasonable interpretation of the book of Revelation, I think most people could probably understand it, don't you think?
Well, yes. In fact, I don't think you can understand it if you take it symbolically. Because although there are symbols in it, the context of the passage that you're looking at reveal that it's symbolic. And you'll find that when the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. And so you'll find that the Bible is not very difficult to understand, even the book of Revelation. And it would be atrocious to even think that God would give the final book in the library of God in a way that people couldn't understand it. And you'll find that the amillennialists, bless their heart, their problem is they start with the assumption that the Scripture is symbolic, and they allegorize everything in it. And if you do that, you'll never understand the book of Revelation. I like to take it particularly from chapter 4 on through the end, and you'll find it unfolds chronologically the complete plan of God for mankind at the time it was written, the rapture of the church, and then on through the tribulation period. And Jesus predicted a tribulation period in Matthew 24:21, in which he said it would be the worst time in the history of the world that ever was or ever would be. And that time is not for punishing people. And Kerby, I've done a recent research that has really thrilled my heart. I'm fascinated by the principle that when God introduced himself, he said, "I am the Lord," declaring the end from the beginning. That is prophecy. I can alone predict the end, and it will be fulfilled. And the fulfillment of prophecy proves that it comes from God. And as God has given us the prophecies of Revelation, he has done it so that mankind could be forewarned of the things to come. And it's an expression of love. If the Lord lets me live long enough, I've got 3 books on my desk now that I'm trying to write, but I have one more that I'm thinking about, and that is the love of God, even during the tribulation period. Now, that's often called the apocalypse, and the world is fashioning that word and throwing it around today. I don't think they know what it means, but it's the tribulation period, the worst time in history. But the purpose of that is for God to show his love for mankind. And believe it or not, when I started my quest through the book, I had already presumed that there were somewhere around 8, maybe 10 expressions of God's love in the tribulation period. To my amazement, I haven't finished it yet. I've gone through the whole book, and I'm going through it again. I have found 39.
39, wow.
Of God's love, like sending the angel with the everlasting gospel to every creature on the face of the earth to make sure they've heard during the tribulation period. And like commissioning 144,000 witnesses that you mentioned, and they reach a multitude which no man can number. Those are only 2 of the many expressions of God's love. It's wonderful to have a Heavenly Father who loved us so much. He has a wonderful plan for our future and our eternity, and he sent his Son so that we might have everlasting life.
Wow. And so, again, we see God's love even in the midst of the apocalypse, in the midst of judgment. It seems to me that sometimes people try to read the book of Revelation in isolation. If there's one principle of hermeneutics or biblical interpretation, you use Scripture to interpret Scripture. And it seems to me that anybody trying to understand the book of Revelation needs to also have certainly read the book of Daniel. As a matter of fact, oftentimes in Bible schools and seminaries, they teach Daniel and Revelation together. And so it does seem to me that even as people go through this quiz, maybe occasionally, as they're reading through the book of Revelation, they should also read through the book of Daniel, don't you think?
Yeah, I laugh when you say that, because this very morning I have spent my whole time preparing a message to Jerry Jenkins, because, believe it or not, we are planning to do a fictional presentation of the truths of the book of Daniel, and I find that they are the key to understanding the book of Revelation. And it's been such a blessing. And so in a few, I'd say maybe a year and a half, the book of Revelation, or the book of Daniel, will be out. We're calling it Daniel, the end-time prophet.
Wow.
Of all the Old Testament prophets, Daniel is the greatest end-time prophet, and one of the 3 men in the Bible, Job and Noah and Daniel alone, were called righteous in their generation.
Great. Well, I'm glad I guessed ahead on that. And since we are talking about this, just before we go, I wanted to mention the fact that the Left Behind movie with Nicolas Cage is coming out. And tell me a little bit more about that, because I know that this is in some respects a reboot, and so many of our listeners that have benefited from the Left Behind series that you just mentioned Jerry Jenkins have written. This movie, I think, has a great opportunity to really challenge unbelievers, and I hope it will be used to advance the gospel.
I do, too. In fact, when we've seen the first cut, they very graciously had us up there to see it. Jerry and I have nothing to do with it because they had the rights to the first two books. And I must say that it is very, very well done. The first videos was never in compliance with our agreement, the contract that we had. It was supposed to be a theatrical movie production. It was never that, never qualified for that. It was just a video. This is going to be a first-class theatrical movie production, and those who've seen some of the edited works now and putting in the music and things that were not ready when we saw it, they're just raving about it. It's very well done.
It will be coming out in October. Of course, as we get closer, we'll talk more about the Left Behind movie, Nicolas Cage in it. And just before we go, Dr. LaHaye, certainly I wanted to encourage people to not only get a copy of this book, but we have a link to Tim LaHaye Ministries, and you can go to timlahaye.com, or we have a link to it on the website. You have all sorts of books and resources that are available there. So tell me for just a minute what people can find when they do land on your webpage.
They can find all of my 80 books and pick the ones they want. We've got several in our warehouse that are out of print now, but God has blessed my writing. It's just a gift from God. I never dreamed I would be a writer. I just was a preacher in a little country church when I was in college and internationally unknown. But I love God, and I like to communicate His Word, and it's an honor to be a writer, because when you think about it, if you want to leave a legacy, God Himself chose writing and publishing His Word in the library of God as a means of communicating to mankind. And I can't think of a better way to leave a legacy than the Word of God written in terms that people can understand.
Well, again, let me just encourage you to go to his website. Of course, he's also co-authored books with Craig Parshall, and we also mentioned Jerry Jenkins, but some on family life, some on temperament, some on the issue of sex, of course, the will of God, prophecy, Jesus Christ, of course, quite a bit on the subject of secular humanism, all sorts of books, more than 80 books written by Dr. Tim LaHaye. He's been a great friend of the ministry. I know Marlon Maddox so much counted you as a friend, and we so appreciated the fact that you many times on a Friday would come into this studio, although we're in a new studio now, and actually keep the broadcast going. So thank you so very much for being with us today. Thank you for writing this book, The Book of Revelation Made Clear, and we look forward to the next time when we can have you on the program.
Good to be with you, Kerby. Call anytime.
Okay. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time getting into some issues in the news. Certainly a lot of things that we have been following these last few days. And we will, first of all, focus a little time and attention on what is happening in Israel. We'll get into that in much more detail tomorrow. Gary Frazier will be with us in studio. We're going to talk about Israel, talk about prophecy and some of that. But then we're going to get back into the issue of immigration. The governor of the state of Texas wrote a very long piece today in the Wall Street Journal expressing his concern and the need for us to do something about this humanitarian crisis. So we're going to look at those issues, and as we always do, open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. If you'd like to know a little bit more about our first hour guest, Kay Wyma, our second hour guest, Tim LaHaye, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to spend just a minute or two talking about Israel. We'll get into that in more detail tomorrow with Gary Fraser. But I thought I would quote a little bit from Gary Bauer. About a week ago, he talked about the fact that you had all sorts of Palestinian terrorists firing and at one point almost 100 different rockets into Israel in a 24-hour period. You've got to understand there are two issues. Number one, the threat to Israel, but number two, the economic consequences of this. Michelle Smith, who was on the program with us and maybe will be on again, mentioned when she was over there that when they fire a rocket from, say, the Gaza Strip or some other place, we'll use the Gaza Strip as an example for just a minute, the cost of that rocket, maybe $100. It's not guided, it's just launched and it lands who knows where. To protect especially the cities with the so-called Iron Dome, the rockets they send up to intercept it and blow it up, thousands of dollars, I think $10,000. Well, you can see very quickly if you keep firing rockets, the cost to the Palestinians is in the hundreds, and the cost to Israel is in the tens of thousands every time one of those is shot. You fire hundreds of those, you're changing the equation from the cost to Gaza of thousands to the cost of Israel into hundreds of thousands. And so you can see very quickly it's an attempt almost to drain the economy of Israel. So there is quite a bit going on. Well, anyway, Gary Bauer goes on to say these latest attacks from Hamas, which are now part of the Palestinian government, are reaching further into Israel. 2 rockets were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system over the greater Tel Aviv area. And, of course, there is renewed talk, he says, of another Palestinian uprising or a third intifada. He says Israel is responding. The IDF launched airstrikes into Gaza. Of course, since then, this was written. Of course, they've also sent in some commandos as part of what's called Operation Protective Edge. And the government has authorized the activization of 40,000 reservists. Predictably, he goes on to say the media commentators are describing the Israeli action as part of the cycle of violence. And that's the point that I wanted to make, which we'll come back to maybe tomorrow when we talk with Gary Frazier. And that is, Gary Bauer points out that when Palestinian rockets are fired at Israeli citizens and Israel doesn't respond, the media never report the attacks. You might not even know about some of those attacks if you were to watch some of the programs on, say, the BBC or CNN. But interesting enough, he says when Israel does respond, then it gets blamed for the cycle of violence. And Gary Bauer goes on to say, as we have reported from time to time, anti-Israeli activists are very adept at manipulating the media. Far too often, the left-wing media are willing participants in the manipulation due to their anti-Israel bias. He goes on to say that the BBC is among one of the worst offenders. But the news giant grew suspicious, he says, about a social media site providing what claimed were photos of damage caused by Israeli strikes in Gaza. A further investigation determined that many of the pictures were bogus, dating back several years and from Iraq and Syria. This is just one reminder that Western civilization is the midst of an ongoing propaganda war for hearts and minds. Gary Bauer goes on to say, meanwhile, there are no signs that talks with Iran are accomplishing anything towards ending its nuclear weapons program. In fact, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is saying that his country needs even more nuclear enrichment capability. The leader there believes that the West is weak, unwilling to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. And at a dinner recently, the leader said that the reason they are not attacking us is because it's too costly. Quote, the enemy has no other option at its disposal but to make threats and impose sanctions. We can see that dealing with some of these Middle East conflicts is not going to be easy. One of the most difficult parts of that conflict is it's hard to draw up a peace treaty when one side desires that the other side simply cease to exist. As I've pointed out on this program before, the Palestinian Authority and its precursor, the PLO, actually is recently, as just a few years ago, when you would go to their website and see a map of the Middle East, there was no place for Israel. They just simply had the word Palestine. I mean, the illustration, obviously, is we do not see a place for Israel, and our ultimate goal is to push everyone in Israel into the sea. So it is difficult to have an honest broker on the other side when the goal of that other side is to completely destroy
the nation of Israel. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow, but certainly wanted to address that issue of Israel. And it's led to a few of you asking a question because, after all, we do have a tour, 10 Days in Israel, and we've been promoting it. It's still on our website. We're down to only a few that could now join us because I think we are getting pretty close to a full tour. But some have said, well, what about all the violence? And if you were listening to the program just the other day when we had President Mark Bailey with us of Dallas Theological Seminary, he pointed out something off air, and so I asked him to say it on air, and that is the people that have gone over to Israel, and I'm sure Gary Fraser will mention this tomorrow, have noticed an interesting trend. That is, when it's tourist season, there doesn't seem to be any violence. Because after all, it's in the interest of both Israeli and Arab to have a tourist trade. And if you scare off the tourist, you are going to have real serious economic consequences in that region of the world. So it is kind of intriguing that oftentimes you see some of the fighting taking place right now. This is sort of tourist season, but not really. The real tourist season really kind of goes from October to December, then again from about February to May. It's just really too hot over there right now, and a lot of tourists don't tend to come over there in the summer. And so as a result, you're hearing this conflict. But I got this feeling by the time fall rolls around, this will be resolved one way or the other, and many people that have been in Israel say they feel much safer in Israel than they do in the United States. So if that's a question in your mind, certainly I thought I would mention that, and we do still have an opportunity for maybe just a handful of you to join our tour, 10 Days in Israel. It's on our website, pointofview.net. Let me just change topics, moving from Israel to immigration, another one of our I words that we've been talking about, and that is the governor of the state of Texas, Rick Perry, today wrote a very long piece, and I'll try to summarize it as quickly as I can, but it's entitled, What Obama Missed on the Border. He says if the president came to see the disastrous effects of Washington's policy in person, he might want to act. And Governor Rick Perry said that in 2012, I alerted the federal government to the growing problem of unaccompanied minors making the treacherous journey across Mexico to reach the United States. So recognize this was 2 years ago. He says at that point, the minors could actually be numbered in the hundreds or thousands. In recent months, tens of thousands of children have come across the border and are now housed in federal facilities across the United States, the result of failed federal policies and Washington's indifference to securing the border. He says, I visited one of these facilities in June and saw these children frightened and alone who left their homes and families, survived a harrowing trip, and are now facing an unknown future. It was staggering to realize that this humanitarian crisis is not the result of a natural disaster, but of our nation's own misguided laws and misplaced priorities. It's nothing less than a moral outrage. He goes on to say that President Obama last week proposed a $3.7 billion in spending to deal with the continuing crisis, but only a small fraction of that money would actually go to the core of the problem, that is, the lack of sufficient resources to secure the border. The majority of the billions he proposed to spend, including on housing and transporting the minors around the country, is treating the symptoms of the problem instead of addressing the root cause. When I met with President Obama last Wednesday, Rick Perry says, to discuss this crisis, I reminded him that securing the border is not only one of the core responsibilities of the federal government, it's also an attainable goal. He said, I made clear that this is not just Texas' problem. The effects of a porous border are felt everywhere. In the case of the children, many will ultimately be released on the condition that they appear after waiting many months or even years for a hearing to determine whether they should be deported. Experience shows that many simply won't show up, vanishing into cities across the country. The porous border also leads to increased crime, a stronger drug trade, and the specter of international terror. There have been numerous instances of illegal border crossings by people from countries with ties to terrorism, including Somalia, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Albania. This has been a concern in my state for many years, which is why Texas has stepped in where the federal government hasn't. Since 2005, Texas has spent more than $500 million to fill the significant gaps in federal efforts to secure the border. We have deployed planes and helicopters, watercraft, and surveillance teams to quickly respond in remote areas of the border region where illegal activity is expected. I'll continue reading from that when we come back from the break, but I'd love to get your comments as well. Is it time to spend $3.7 billion? Is it time to close the border? Do we need more border security? And what to do with this humanitarian crisis? Love to get your thoughts. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue hearing from Governor Rick Perry right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Reading a piece from Governor Rick Perry, but since one of the calls talks about Rick Perry, let me go to that phone call right away. Tim in Georgia, thank you for calling today.
Hello, I like the show, enjoy it. The question that I have is, why didn't Rick Perry ask Obama, why can't we build a fence? What is the problem with building a fence? I'm sure $3.5 billion to get that fence built.
Sure. And let me just ask, since you're on the car, I'll just put you on hold, but you can hear the question and the answer. It's a question that has been asked of Rick Perry when he ran for the presidency. You might remember that a couple of years ago, and at the time he rejected the idea, not that we shouldn't have a fence, but here was his argument, and I'll just try to make his argument, and then if some of you want to agree or disagree, you can. The first point is that I think, if I can honestly represent his viewpoint, is that fencing works well in strategic areas, for example, in cities. El Paso is a good example. For example, Laredo might be another one. And so in those places, that would certainly be helpful. And of course, he would also agree if he were the governor of California, that this fences in San Diego and places like that. But let's look at the state of Texas for just a minute. There's 1,200 miles from El Paso to Brownwood, excuse me. And as a result, that 1,200 miles and having a fence along that entire area just doesn't make sense, according to him. So what I think more are talking about, even those who believe that we should do all we can to secure the border, is to have fencing where it makes sense, where individuals are traveling, and to use other kinds of mechanisms, whether it's drones that are flying, whether it's various SUVs and Jeeps going up and down the border, any kind of thing to prevent individuals from coming in. It is just almost impossible, given the incredibly long border that we have with Mexico, both in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and then Texas, to wall all of it off. But it does seem to me that there are some places where fences have worked, do work, and should be implemented. And so that's kind of been the argument from Governor Rick Perry. But if you'd like to agree or disagree, let me give you a chance to join our conversation. 1-800-351-1212. Let me go back real quickly, though, to point out that a lot of people saying, well, what's Texas doing? And he pointed out in this piece that came out today that already Texas has spent $500 million or $500 million to fill in some of the gaps left by the federal government. He says we've deployed planes and helicopters, watercraft, surveillance teams to quickly respond in remote areas of the border region, which I think are places where putting a fence makes less sense, according to him. He says we were doing that even before the Federal Border Patrol was overwhelmed by the current crisis, since we know that transnational gangs and drug cartels are always looking for opportunities to take advantage of diversions. He says last month committed an additional spending of $1.3 million a week to expand law enforcement operations in the region. Some have even suggested that the state of Texas should require the federal government to reimburse them. But as he concludes, all of these have been stopgap measures. Securing the border is a national responsibility, even if it hasn't been taken seriously in Washington for far too long. He says, as I told the president, the first step in granting my long-standing request to send 1,000 National Guard troops to the border to supplement security efforts until a sufficient number of Border Patrol officers are hired, trained, and deployed. He also goes on to say the president needs to direct the Federal Aviation Administration to allow drones to monitor suspected illegal activity along the border and track those responsible. He also needs to work with Congress to revisit and modify existing laws, including one that we've talked about before, this 2008 law that unintentionally makes it harder to deport individuals from countries other than Mexico and Canada. Such laws serve as magnets for illegal immigrants who are hearing that if they or their children make it to the United States, they can stay indefinitely without consequence. Goes on and talks about some of the other things that should be done, but for people that are looking for action items, certainly Rick Perry has given us quite a few. James Carafano, need to get him back on the program, has put together 5 steps to solving the southern border crisis. I'll see if we can post that article in the next day or two, maybe on our Friday weekend edition. But since we got talking about the border fence, let's go back and get some of your comments on the fence. And Roy in Texas, KCTA, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've got a couple of things. I believe that there's so much deeper agenda behind this unwillingness to secure the border by the federal government. I don't see it as a humanitarian thing. I believe there are nefarious intent on allowing this to happen in order to facilitate the influx of detrimental individuals who would pose threats to our country, so that the powers that be could use those threats as specters to continue to stay in power. They would use that to, like, say, for example, if some of these people were bringing yellow cake across the borders, and causing mass hysteria, which would incite martial law. And then certain things would fall into legality, like I'm going to declare that, I'm going to be a dictator. And, read the Patriot Act. It's disgusting. This thing, the liberty-stripping Patriot Act, is just rife with circumstances that would allow some cataclysmic event to change the way we understand governance for the rest of our lives.
Sure. When the Patriot Act came out, I said, everybody likes that right now because George W. Bush is in office and the Attorney General is John Ashcroft. We like John Ashcroft, but you might have an Attorney General someday that you may not feel so comfortable about. Of course, we found that out. My commentary today, which just underscores some of the things you said, Roy, and people can read it by going to the Point of View blog, is the idea that this might be part of what's called a Cloward-Piven strategy. We've had two members of Congress, Steve King as well as Steve Stockman, both use that phrase. And if you're not familiar with it, although we've talked about it on the program before, it goes back to Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, who were professors at Columbia University, where President Obama attended as an undergraduate student. They, at the time, were talking about using a strategy by which they could overwhelm the welfare system and change the government. This is an attempt, I think, to overwhelm the system in terms of immigration and to bring about a change. So certainly I've been writing about that, and we've been talking about it. So I appreciate your comment. But let me just give one more comment before we run out of time to Judy in Georgia. You'll be the last caller of the day. What would you like to share with us? Judy, are you there?
Been listening, and someone just covered my question, but I think if what we do, it's like if we go to Mexico illegally, you know what happens to us? We would get shot.
Or imprisoned.
No trial, no nothing.
Yeah.
I do not agree with shooting children, but I think they should be loaded onto a plane immediately and
yeah, we're kind of losing you, but I think we know what you're getting at. Unfortunately, we're losing your cell phone there. But again, it doesn't seem to me that we just simply, as the governor was saying in his piece here, just let them go and hope they return. Now they're talking about putting them in the various camps, giving them positive experiences, and as a result, that is going to send a signal that if you can make it across the border, they're going to feed you, they're going to clothe you, they're going to vaccinate you, probably going to educate you, you'll probably get to stay, and even if you don't, it's going to be a lot better than what you have right now. Will that increase the number coming across the border or decrease it? And I think we all know the answer to that. We'll spend some time in the next couple of days talking about this issue. Tomorrow, front and center, we're going to talk about Israel, the Middle East, also the prophetic implications. Gary Frazier will be with us Friday, our weekend edition. We'll get back to this issue of immigration, and we'll learn some lessons from certainly some of our experts. But most importantly, if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we're talking about today here on Point of View, feel free to visit the website, pointofview.net. We have both of the books that we've talked about, Cleaning House by Kay Wyma, as well as the Book of Revelation Made Clear by Tim LaHaye. It's all available on our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.